1856, Tennessee. A plantation near Memphis swelled with the false laughter of white men celebrating the 4th of July. Fireworks cracked above the river, smoke drifting into the humid night, while the master's house shone like a fortress of light. Candles burned in every window, violins screamed their polished tunes, and the air inside thickened with roast meat and brandy fumes. Freedom. Yes, that was the word on every lip. Freedom toasted with silver cups, freedom chanted with slurred songs, freedom held aloft like a trophy meant only for them. For the enslaved, there was no such word. They moved like shadows through corridors, balancing trays, scrubbing spills, carrying wood to the hearth. Their eyes did not meet their master's eyes. They did not join in the laughter. They swallowed silence, as they always had, even as the word freedom tore through the air like a cruel joke. Among them was Mary Ellis, the cook, 24 years old, thin-armed, narrow-faced, but her silence carried weight heavier than iron. She had learned it from her mother, Ruth, a girl stolen from Virginia as a teenager, pushed south in chains and sold to Harper's father. Ruth had whispered to her daughter never to cry before them, never to show pain. "They feed on it," she said. "They eat your tears like sugar." Ruth had whispered, too, of another truth, that one day a reckoning would come, and it would not arrive with trumpet blasts, but with quiet steps in the dark. That reckoning was seeded in Mary early. At 12, she was shoved into the town square by Jonathan Harper himself. Harper, drunk on whiskey and arrogance, demanded she dance before his guests, his boots stamping as if she were some minstrel's puppet. Her feet stumbled over dirt, her eyes blurred with tears, and when the laughter reached its peak, Harper spat into her face and called her a living possession. That single humiliation branded her soul far worse than the lash. She carried it like a secret brand, hidden but never healed. Too frail for the fields, Mary was forced into the kitchen. There she endured another rhythm of torment. Overseer cooks cuffed her ears for mistakes, white women paraded her like a curiosity, and every meal became a test of survival. Yet in that space of fire and knives, Mary grew sharper. She learned the master's habits, what he ate, how much he drank, the medicines he swallowed for his shortness of breath, the way his legs trembled after long days of indulgence. Knowledge became her weapon, patience her shield. But her mother and brothers never lived to see her gather that weapon. After a failed escape, Harper hanged them all from a great oak at the edge of the plantation. He forced every enslaved person to attend. They were lined up like cattle, eyes lowered, as ropes tightened around necks, the air filled with choking sounds, with the creak of bending wood. Mary stood among them, her small hands clenched, her body shivering, but her gaze fixed on the oak. She swore that day that the tree would not remain his monument. One day it would claim him too. Years passed. Mary grew into a woman who endured insults and blows, but she never let the memory of the oak fade. She worked with diligence, served with bowed head, but her mind catalogued every detail of Harper's weakness. She knew how wine dulled his limbs. She knew how breath left his chest after a fit of coughing. She knew he trusted her silence. And now, on the 4th of July, 1856, Harper's arrogance had blinded him completely. The house rang with music. Fiddlers played reels while guests stamped boots and clapped hands. Women fanned themselves in gowns of silk, their jewels flashing in the candlelight. Men shouted speeches about the Union, about liberty, about the destiny of white men to rule. Outside, the sky glowed red and green from fireworks launched over the Mississippi, their thunder rolling across the cotton fields. The enslaved watched from shadows, carrying platters of pork glazed in molasses, pouring whiskey into crystal cups, refilling pipes. Not one dared smile, but every ear recorded the hypocrisy. Freedom toasted with every gulp of rum, liberty shouted by mouths that owned the lives of hundreds. Harper, swollen with liquor, boasted to his guests about his loyal stock. He told the story of Mary herself, how she once tried to run but was too weak, how she was better suited to the kitchen. He laughed as though her life were a parable of his own genius. His laughter shook the chandelier, his words tore into Mary's flesh like invisible claws. Late in the night, after the last toast and the last fireworks, Harper stumbled outside. The air was heavy with gene powder smoke, the earth damp from river mist. He demanded Mary follow him into the darkness. "I need air," he slurred, leaning heavily on her small frame. None of the other servants dared approach. They had seen that look in his eyes before, the mixture of drink, pride, and cruelty. They let Mary lead him alone. She guided him down the long path past the slave quarters, past the stables, toward the edge of the plantation. Each step echoed the vow she had carried since childhood. The oak loomed ahead, a black skeleton against the starry sky. Its branches were thick, its bark still scarred where ropes had bitten years before. Harper laughed, then coughed, his voice breaking. He never saw the noose Mary carried, the rope kept hidden near the tree since that day of execution. There, beneath the same oak that had murdered her mother and brothers, Mary Ellis stopped walking. Her face, so long a mask of obedience, hardened into iron. Harper muttered a command, but his body sagged. She looped the rope with quick hands, fastened it to the old limb, and drew it around his throat. He resisted feebly, drunkenly, but his body had grown too weak to fight. Mary pulled with the strength of the dead behind her, their weight in her arms, their voices in her ears. His strangled gasp echoed the screams she had heard as a child. The oak groaned once more, the rope burned her palms, but she did not let go. She pulled until his body went still, until the silence of justice covered the field. The night of retribution had come. The kitchen was Mary Ellis's prison and her training ground. Built from old brick and timber, it stood a few yards behind the master's house, close enough that the smoke from its chimney drifted into the parlor, perfuming the air with roasted meats and baked bread. But to those who worked inside, it was a furnace, a place of endless fire and sweat, where the air itself seemed to blister skin. Mary had been sent there young, too frail for the cotton rows, too slight to drag sacks under the overseer's lash. "Let her cook," Harper had said with a smirk. "She can at least boil water if she can't work the fields." But in truth, the kitchen was no sanctuary. It was another battlefield, one where mistakes were punished as severely as any broken hoe. The overseer cooks were brutal. Some were enslaved men, broken into cruelty by years of survival. Others were poor whites, hired to guard the line between house and field. They slapped Mary when stew boiled too long, cuffed her ears when bread came out scorched, whipped her shoulders when she moved too slowly. Even the mistress of the house, Harper's wife, treated her as a curiosity to display before guests. "See how small she is," she would say, pressing Mary forward like an exhibit. "And yet she can make a feast fit for kings." Mary would bow her head, say nothing, and return to the fire. But silence was not weakness. Her eyes recorded everything. She noted which spice pleased Harper's tongue, how much salt his stomach could endure before pain bent him double. She knew his fondness for red wine, his cough after too many cigars, his habit of clutching his chest when laughter rose too high. She memorized his footsteps on the stairs, the rhythm of his voice when drunk, the way his hand trembled when signing bills. Every detail was a seed, every seed a weapon waiting for its season. The other slaves envied the house servants at times. "At least you don't face the sun all day," they whispered. But Mary knew better. The kitchen had its own sun, one that never set, one that burned without mercy. The fire seared her arms, the smoke stung her eyes, and the weight of scrutiny pressed heavier than any sack of cotton. To feed a man who claimed your body as property was not a blessing. It was torment dressed as duty. Her mother Ruth had known the fields instead. Strong and stubborn, Ruth worked with her sons in the cotton rows, her back bent, but her spirit unbroken. Mary had watched her mother steal moments of defiance, humming old songs under her breath, slipping extra food to starving children, whispering prayers into the night. Ruth carried a fragment of Virginia in her heart, a memory of hills and rivers Mary had never seen. "We were not born for chains," she would whisper as she tucked Mary into straw bedding. "Remember that." But remembering came at a cost. After Ruth and the boys were caught trying to flee, Harper staged their execution as theater. He gathered every enslaved person, lined them up by the oak at the plantation's edge, and forced them to watch. Mary stood there, a girl of 12, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. She heard the thud of the trap door, the crack of rope under weight. the choking gasps. She watched her mother's body twist in the air, her brothers beside her, their feet kicking at nothing. The master called it justice. Mary called it a lesson. That oak never left her. Even in the kitchen, amid the clatter of pots and hiss of grease, she felt its shadow stretching over her. She carried wood for the fire, and in each log she saw the tree. She scrubbed the copper pots until her fingers bled, and in the reflection of the polished metal she saw her mother's face. She cut meat for Harper's supper, and every slice was a rehearsal for the cut she longed to make into history itself. And still the humiliations never ceased. Harper often brought visitors to the kitchen door to display her. "Look at her," he would say, his words dripping with pride disguised as cruelty. "She's my property, my cook, my little Virginia stock. She can't run, she can't fight, but she can season a roast better than most white women." Laughter would follow, sometimes spittle, sometimes a shove to force her to curtsy. Mary obeyed, her face still, her eyes burning. One summer, Harper forced her to prepare a feast for a visiting judge. The table was lined with quail, venison, corn cakes, pies, and Harper bragged that it had all been the work of his little slave. Afterward, drunk on pride and liquor, he dragged her into the hall and commanded her to dance again, as he had when she was 12. She moved slowly, woodenly, her body trembling under the gaze of the guests. When she faltered, Harper struck her across the face. Blood filled her mouth. She did not cry. She finished the dance, then returned to the kitchen, where she spat blood into the stew fire and swore another vow. He would not die in bed. He would die on the rope. The years hardened her. She learned to disguise hatred with obedience, to let her silence become a mask. She listened to Harper boast about his wealth, his good stock, his power over life and death. She listened to the white ladies gossip about abolitionists in the North, about uprisings in other states. She listened, and each word became fuel. Patience was her shield, but memory was her blade. Even among the enslaved, her quiet set her apart. Some whispered that she was cursed, that the oak had taken part of her soul. Others looked to her with respect, sensing something unyielding in her. She did not laugh, did not sing, did not join in games at the quarters, but when sickness struck, she nursed the weak with herbs. When children cried, she told them stories of rivers in Virginia she had never seen but imagined from her mother's words. Every dawn she returned to the kitchen. She lit the fire, stirred the pots, and endured the daily humiliations. But each spark from the hearth reminded her of the oak, the way rope had burned against bark, the sound of Harper's laughter over her mother's strangled gasps. That memory never cooled. It smoldered, waiting. The kitchen taught her two things, that survival required silence, and that silence could one day be sharpened into vengeance. She learned to measure time not by seasons or harvests, but by Harper's aging body, his coughs, his complaints, his growing weakness. She measured too the patience within herself, the slow burning coal of her hatred. And so she waited. Each plate she served was not just food, it was study. Each command she obeyed was not submission, it was preparation. The kitchen was her chain, but it was also her forge. And in its fire, Mary Ellis was not broken. She was tempered. Years passed, but the oak did not forget, and neither did Mary Ellis. She grew into womanhood in silence, her body carrying the scars of labor, but her mind carrying sharper things. Others might have bent under years of humiliation, but she did not bend. She hardened. Jonathan Harper, her master, was no longer the proud young man who had forced her to dance in the town square. He had grown heavier, slower. Drink softened his belly, tobacco clogged his lungs, and gout stiffened his legs. His hands, once so quick to strike, now trembled when he lifted a glass. He wheezed after laughter, coughed after wine. His friends whispered about his decline, but to Mary, each ailment was not weakness, it was opportunity. She marked each one in her secret ledger of memory. Every meal became a chance to study him. She noticed how he favored rich pork dishes, though they left him sweating and gasping afterward. She saw how his joints swelled on damp days, how his eyes clouded after brandy, how his breath grew short in the night. She served his wine with bowed head, but inside she measured how much it took to dull him. She refilled his pipe with trembling hands, but she knew which tobacco left him dizzy, which left him sick. He thought her silence meant ignorance. It meant calculation. Patience became her shield. She had no choice but to wait for his body to fail enough that the oak could finish what her vow had promised. To strike too soon would mean her death without justice. To wait meant certainty. Others grew old around her. Some broke under the strain, their bodies giving way in the fields. Some were sold south, never to be seen again. New children were born into chains, their cries swallowed by the same soil that had buried Mary's family. Through it all, she remained at the kitchen fire, silent, watchful, waiting. At times, despair pressed upon her. Nights when she lay on the hard pallet in the quarters, she would hear the distant laughter from the master's house, hear the fiddles, the clinking glasses, the shouts of freedom. She would close her eyes and see her mother's body twisting in the air. She would hear her brothers choking, their heels scraping bark. She would whisper no prayers, only promises. Her resolve was tested again and again. Once a white visitor cornered her in the pantry, pressing close, whispering vile things. She kept her silence, endured, then returned to the kitchen fire with her rage banked like coals. Another time, Harper, in his drunken pride, boasted to guests about how he had broken her spirit. Mary bowed and refilled his glass, but her mind was already counting how many more fourths he might live. The oak remained her witness. She passed it each morning on her way to gather herbs, each evening when carrying scraps to the hogs. Its branches stretched like arms of the dead, its bark rough and scarred from the ropes it had held. Sometimes she stopped and pressed her hand against its trunk. "Not yet," she would whisper, "but soon." Years taught her subtlety. She learned to hide her thoughts so deeply that even fellow slaves doubted she had any fire left in her. Some pitied her silence, others feared it. "She don't laugh," they whispered. "She don't sing, she just watches." But children trusted her. They came to her for stories in the quarters, where she told them of rivers that ran free, of mountains too high for chains. She gave them scraps of hope, though she herself lived on vengeance. In the winter of 1855, Harper fell ill with a fever. For weeks he lay sweating in his bed, doctors coming and going, leeches bleeding him, tonics poured down his throat. Mary tended his meals, fed him broths, wiped his brow with cloths. No one suspected her thoughts as she stood by his bed, watching him twitch and moan. Part of her longed to finish him then, but not in bed, not in sickness. That was too small an ending. The oak was waiting. She would wait too. By spring he recovered, though weaker than before. His friends joked about his frailty. He laughed with them, coughing between gulps of brandy. He boasted still of his loyal stock, pointing to Mary as proof of his mastery. Each word only deepened her resolve. The summer of 1856 arrived with suffocating heat. Cotton fields shimmered, cicadas screamed in the trees, and tempers shortened under the heavy air. Harper planned a grand 4th of July gathering to prove his vitality. Invitations went out across the county. There would be music, fireworks, feasting. "Let us drink to freedom," he declared, "and to the blessings of Providence." Mary prepared for the feast in silence. She roasted meats, baked breads, churned butter, brewed cider. Her hands moved with practiced obedience, but her mind counted hours. The oak seemed to loom closer with each day, its shadow stretching across her thoughts, even in the kitchen's glare. On the morning of July 4th, she walked past the oak once more. The grass around its roots was still flattened from years of gatherings, from the day of her family's hanging. She touched its bark, rough under her fingers, and felt the scars of rope. "Tonight," she whispered. The tree did not answer, but the wind stirred its leaves like a murmur of assent. That night, the master's house swelled with noise. Guests arrived in wagons and carriages, their laughter spilling out into the night air. Violins shrieked, glasses clinked, fireworks lit the sky. Mary moved among them unseen, serving platters, refilling cups, bowing her head. Harper grew drunker with each toast, his voice louder, his face redder. He laughed about his loyal stock, mocked the abolitionists, shouted of liberty. His friends cheered. None noticed the cook's steady gaze. Near midnight, Harper demanded air. His body sagged, his steps faltered. He ordered Mary to guide him outside. She obeyed, leading him past the quarters, past the stables, toward the oak. The fireworks still cracked overhead, masking the silence of their walk. The oak loomed before them, its branches black against the stars. The scars of old ropes glistened in the moonlight. Harper stumbled, cursing, his breath ragged. "Damn heat," he muttered. "Damn weak lungs." He leaned on her shoulder, too blind to see her resolve. Mary reached the tree. She drew the rope she had hidden long ago. Her hands, steady as ever in the kitchen, moved quickly now. She fastened the noose to the old limb, looped it around his throat. Harper gasped, tried to pull away, but his body was too weak, too sodden with drink. Mary pulled with all the strength of her vow. His strangled cry echoed through the fields, but the fireworks swallowed the sound. His feet kicked against the air, just as her mother's had. His hands clawed at the rope, just as her brother's had. Mary's grip tightened, her arms burning with the weight of justice. At last, his body went still. The oak groaned, the rope creaked, and silence fell heavier than the night. Mary did not weep. She stood beneath the tree, her chest rising steady, her eyes unblinking. She had kept her vow, the oak had remembered, and the night of freedom's false songs had ended in true reckoning. By dawn on July 5th, the house of celebration had become a house of whispers. Harper was gone. His body had been found swaying from the oak by farmhands, who froze in terror at the sight. Some claimed they heard the rope creak through the night, others that they saw a shadowed figure standing beneath the branches until morning. What they agreed upon was this: Mary Ellis did not run. She was seized at the kitchen hearth, her apron still smelling of smoke and rope tar. The overseer struck her across the face, demanding confession, but she offered no words. They dragged her to the carriage house, bound her wrists, and left her there until the sheriff arrived. When asked to explain herself, she said nothing. Only her eyes moved toward the oak visible beyond the door, its branches still heavy with the memory of Harper's body. The trial came swiftly. In Memphis, courtrooms were not places of justice, but theaters of power. Planters filled the benches, mistresses in veils clutched handkerchiefs, and men spat curses as Mary was led in. They dressed her in coarse white, claiming it was proper, though it looked like burial cloth against her dark skin. The prosecutor thundered about savagery, about the danger of giving Negroes positions of trust. He called Harper an honorable man, struck down by an ingrate. But when it came time for Mary to speak, she did not plead, she did not beg. She lifted her head and stared out the window. Beyond the glass, just visible, stood the oak. The court fell silent as her gaze lingered there. Some swore she smiled, others that her lips moved in prayer. The jury deliberated only minutes. Guilty. Death by hanging. On the morning of her execution, crowds gathered in the square. Vendors sold cider. Children perched on shoulders. Ministers prayed. The gallows loomed, its rope swaying gently in the summer wind. Mary was led forward, her steps slow but steady. She did not resist, did not cry. When asked for last words, she looked beyond the sea of faces, beyond the soldiers, beyond the sheriff, and fixed her eyes on the horizon. "She is mad," someone whispered, but another answered, "No, she remembers." The trap gave way, and the rope snapped taut. Yet even as her body swung, silence gripped the square. Not triumph, not relief fear. For in that moment, every master saw the shadow of the oak. Every mistress imagined her cook's quiet hands tying knots in the dark. And every enslaved person watching felt a spark of something long buried. That terror could be turned back upon its keepers. They buried her in unmarked ground, but memory refused burial. In the quarters, her name was whispered with awe. Mary Ellis proved the tree remembers, they said. Some left small offerings at the oak's roots, a ribbon, a scrap of cloth, a kernel of corn. Others carved her initials into cabin walls or sang her name low in work songs where overseers could not hear. For the planters, her act sowed unease. No longer could they trust the silence of their servants. The kitchen became a place of suspicion, the fields of watchfulness. Even years later, some families refused to let their cooks step outside during feasts, fearing the shadow of Mary's patience. For the enslaved, she became more than a woman. She was proof that memory could be sharper than any blade, that patience could strangle power itself. Mothers told their children of her vow. Old men whispered of the night freedom's lies were drowned beneath a hanging body. And the oak still it stood, scarred, gnarled, unyielding. The tree that had once been a monument of terror became, through her hands, a monument of justice. Travelers claimed it groaned louder in storms, as if rope still bit its branches. Some swore they saw a figure beneath it on July nights, small and straight-backed, staring at the horizon with eyes that did not blink. Mary Ellis was executed, but she was not erased. She became a story carried in whispers, a memory braided into songs, a warning passed from one firelit circle to another, and the saying spread, "The tree remembers."